Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Society for Education in Anesthesia webcast. And today it's my great pleasure to have Rebecca Dale from the University of Washington visiting us today. She is the Fellowship Director for the Chronic Pain Fellowship at UW. And today she's going to talk to us about the PLEX program, which is the Pain Learning Exchange Didactic Program. Now, it's interesting because this is, I suspect this may be a little bit similar to the previous webcast that we've done on the pediatric Anesthesia Fellowship Exchange. So let's be exciting to hear about this and how it's the same and how it might be different. So Rebecca, I always like to, welcome you and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're excited to hear about this. And the way I like to start is, what was the problem that you were trying to solve? What motivated you to get involved in this project?
Well, the initial problem was during COVID, nationwide, all the fellows for pain were sitting at home while the clinics were closed. And as you know, pain fellowships are a very brief 1 year, and there's really no time to be lost. And they were feeling very isolated and let down. They're in a strange city. So trying to find a way to make people feel connected, to continue the learning, and yeah, just to keep the fellowship moving.
Okay, so keep this fellowship moving. Was it mostly the didactics that was the issue, and the connectiveness of getting them to be able to interact with each other? What was the major thing that was, really bothering you?
Well, I would say that the major thing was that the clinics were closed, and unfortunately, I couldn't simulate or make up for lost clinical time or lost procedural interventional time. But what I could make up for was trying to continue the learning and also to expand the didactic so that they could learn from other programs. And thereby they could make some connections. They were all really stressed out about trying to find a job. They could talk to other fellows across the nation and see how they were doing it. And then because all societies, all those meetings were shut down as well, it's difficult for them to make just to really introduce themselves into the world of pain, which is small, and these meetings are important to sort of rub elbows with important people. So just trying to facilitate that at the same time was the goal. I couldn't solve all of the problems, obviously, with this didactic, but
Well, why don't you give us a little bit of so how did you start? What was your solution to this problem, at least the initial solution, because it may have evolved over time.
Correct, yeah. So the initial solution was that I just sat down in my home office, which was my bedroom, and cold emailed as many programs that I could think of and that I could easily find the program director's email address on their website. And I just randomly emailed people and said, hey, let's get together and organize something for our fellows. And I started a quick Google Drive with a Excel sheet, and every day I had a slot for different institutions to sign themselves up. So every day at the same time, there was a lecture by one of the attendings at the other institution, except that on one day a week we had a journal club. And so the fellow would present a didactic or a journal article with hopefully the author of that paper, which might have been at a different institution. And then we did some case conferences where the fellows presented cases that hopefully they remembered about from before the clinics closed.
Let me back up and just make sure I understand this properly. So you put a Google spreadsheet together. You picked a specific time in the day that you were going to do this didactic. What time did you pick?
Well, that was one of the barriers.
Exactly why I asked.
Yes. It was not as complicated when we're talking about everyone being at home at the same time. So it was 9 in the morning, West Coast time, Pacific time.
Okay.
And so that was no problem when all the fellows were at home.
Okay, so at least at the beginning part, when COVID was really bad and everybody was shut down and everybody was home, you set it up at 9 o'clock, and then you set up a Google spreadsheet and you emailed everybody and said, hey, here's the sheet. Would you be interested in giving a lecture at 9 o'clock? All you need to do is sign up for this spot. Is that right?
Yep. And to make it easy on everybody, I just sort of made my own Outlook invite that I copied and pasted into the email, and I made a contact sheet in the Google Drive so everyone knew who was participating. And then I think one of the key aspects was that I started a library of all the lectures that had been given. And then some of them were recorded. Unfortunately, not all of them were because I couldn't attend all of the lectures. But so all the recordings were posted, all the PowerPoint presentations were posted. So that really developed into a pretty rich resource that programs could use.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. First thing, back on the Google Sheet, did everybody list a topic? You know, what topic that they were going to be?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Exactly. So, and I think the fellows loved that it was not following any type of ACGME guidelines or regulations. It was very fresh. People were talking about things that they were interested in. It wasn't just some old lecture that they have to give every year that they kind of dust off. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. And then what I heard you say was that you, when possible, recorded the lectures and took the material that maybe the authors submitted, whether it was their PowerPoint or even associated resources, could be journal articles and things like that. But where did you host all this stuff so that people could get to it?
It's all on the Google Drive.
All on the
Just
Google
in
Drive.
various in various folders, and I just shared it with everybody, and the settings are such that anybody can upload or download or edit, so it's very open.
Okay. And then, but everybody, how did you get the email to the link to the Google Drive to all of the participants?
I just simply had the share settings to anyone with the link can edit, and I just copy and paste the link in every email that I send out. Like I'll send out reminders or updates if a new program joins, just to welcome everyone. And I always send the link and the Zoom link and the host code so that people don't have to dig too far in their inbox to find it. It's just always there.
Okay, all right, great. Tell me a little bit about how the participation went. You know, how many programs were you able to get to initially participate?
Initially, gosh, it's about a year ago now. Initially, I think we had probably about 5 or 6 programs. They would change depending on whose clinic reopened and who already felt that they already had enough didactics once things got swinging again. But you know, we would have up to 45 participants during sort of the peak of COVID
Okay,
on a daily basis.
all right. And then towards the end, what was the maximum number of programs that you had participating, would you say?
Well, right now we have I think seven or eight.
Okay,
And so it's always been about that number.
all right. Were there any barriers to, you know, to having programs participate?
Well, as I mentioned, the time issue is always a barrier. Just the 3 hour time difference is just huge. And also another barrier that I'm still always trying to work towards is fellow participation. People tend to be pretty shy on Zoom. They, you know, think they can, I'll just turn off my camera and kind of hide here and just listen. But really one of the goals of this program is for people to connect and to communicate and to share ideas. And so, you know, I implemented a couple strategies to try to overcome that barrier.
What kind of strategies did you implement?
Well, I encourage the use of the breakout rooms on Zoom. Problems with that are that not everyone is in the same discussion. But you know, sometimes that kind of breaks the ice, especially towards the beginning. I also changed the way that the didactic is held, and this was to overcome both the time barrier and the interaction barrier. So my new sort of philosophy behind the program is sort of that you have a guest speaker coming to talk with your fellowship or your program, which most institutions have throughout the year. And at least at University of Washington, we have somebody like that. They give a grand rounds, and then maybe they have a lunch with the fellows, or the fellows can ask some questions. And so that sort of interaction is what I wanted to copy via Zoom. And so I have a semi-asynchronous program now where the lecturer can give the lecture at a time of their convenience, which is recorded and uploaded into our library. And then everyone is expected to watch that. Usually it's about a week ahead of time. And then the actual meeting, which is now once a month, is more of a Q&A with that author or that lecturer based on the information that they presented during the recorded lecture. So it helps alleviate the time difference because people can just watch that at their own time. And then it also helps with the communication and interaction.
Right, but from the time difference, they still have to be available to attend the actual live Q&A to get the interaction part. But I see how, that you now have this lecture series that even if I couldn't make the Q&A, that I'd be able to access the lectures. So that's an evolution. So it sounds like because of COVID, as COVID restrictions have eased and then come back and then eased in different parts of the country, that your program has also had to adapt to the different, I guess, what activities were going on at each institution. So today, do you see this model as continuing to persist? So now you're going to do basically once a month and have a guest lecture once a month. And you think you're going to continue with this on, even if we didn't have any COVID?
Yeah, I think that it's been really valuable for the fellows and also for the faculty. People can, especially assistant professors, have the opportunity to lecture at a national, it's actually international because we do have Canadian program as well, venue. And then, yeah, so I think the fellows have really said that it was an excellent opportunity and really loved it last year and this year as well. So I do plan on continuing it.
Okay. It's interesting. I've heard this now in multiple different areas. So regional and acute pain is doing a little something like this, not much. The pediatric people are doing a really nice one. You've got yours going in chronic pain. So, this seems to be a new modality that people are starting to recognize, at least for fellowship training, could be quite valuable.
I think so. I think we're all really busy reinventing the wheel in all our little universities, and now that we've really adopted Zoom as a method of learning and communicating, we've really taken advantage of that, and we can really just incorporate experts from all over the nation.
Yeah, I think and it's much easier to, you probably didn't have that many chronic pain experts coming to your institution for grand rounds, maybe once a year at best, according to our program. So this really extends the reach, and I think this is going to be something that's going to persist beyond COVID. So I think that's fantastic. I want to go back and point out one of the benefits to highlight that for people that are going to watch this, and that is to get from assistant professor to associate professor. Most of the time, the assistant professor may have a local reputation, but an associate professor is expected to have a little bit more, at least, of a regional. It doesn't have to be national or international, but at least has to be a regional reputation. So by participating in a lecture series like this in your CV, you can document that you've given a lecture and that it had a much broader exposure outside your institution. So I think that's an important point for faculty development. Now, one of the questions that I have, though, is it sounds like this would be better if you had a broader participation in programs. Has there been any thought of approaching the pain fellowship directors group about doing something like this, or make it more formal and having greater participation? I think 7 programs is great, but I don't know how many chronic pain fellowships there are, but I suspect there's more than 50, and probably having a little bit better participation could even improve this better. What are your thoughts on that?
No, you're absolutely right, Glenn. So I have been in contact with the APPD, which is the Association for Pain Program Directors, and they are excited about it and do plan to kind of fold this into membership benefit there, while I still am keeping it open for programs who are not a part of the APPD.
Is that common that there are programs that are not part of the APPD?
Well, as I mentioned, it is an international program, and we do have a Canadian program, and the Norwegian consortium is also potentially interested in joining. And so I don't want to limit it to just American programs.
Right, I see. Okay, and I take it that the Pain Fellowship Directors Group doesn't have a public-facing area where they could host all of this. It's they only if you post all of the content there, then it would be restricted to their membership. Is that right?
We talked about that, and they think that they are going to be able to have a login that I could give to participating programs, even if they're not a part of the APPD, so that they would have access to the library. But I think we will be needing to move it off of Google Drive into something a little bit more protected. I'm worried about, as it gets bigger, people sort of having qualms about uploading their PowerPoint slides into something that's so publicly available. And I think also it would be nice to have a few more features that Google Drive doesn't offer, like being able to leave comments if fellows wanted to leave a comment under the video, that kind of thing.
All right, well, that's a next great segue is to what do you see this other technology? What other technology can you use? You've got Google Drives, a lot of people do YouTube channels for, video content, but that wouldn't include all of the other content that you've got. So tell us about what your technology options are and what you think the pros and cons are of these.
Well, to be honest, Glenn, I'm not really an expert in all the different venues. Cost is a big factor because so far this has been completely free, or I guess someone's paying for my non-clinical time, but I've just been doing it myself. And so we don't really have a budget for the technology. And so trying to find something like a YouTube channel, I think we are definitely considering. But then having folders that maybe continuing that on Google Drive, or having a place where we can upload the PowerPoints and the contact sheet and the general information so that all the programs have access to that.
So that's the problem right now,
yeah.
is you can easily set up a YouTube channel that would have these pain webcasts on, and everybody was comfortable with that. But the problem is you would have no way to have the associated content, if any.
Correct. Yeah. So that would need to be uploaded either into the APPD website somehow, where everyone could have access to that website, or just maintained in the Google Drive. But at some point, I'm going to run out of data storage on there.
Probably for the webcast, you will. You won't run into that problem, I think, if you put a YouTube channel. YouTube has changed its policy recently, and now they, even for essentially the free YouTube channels that they're offering, you may have advertising stuck in there that you might not want, unless you wanted to try to be able to pay for some sort of video casting hosting that you could. One of the advantages of using a service like that, like YouTube, is that other things is the player, so that when they play it back, some of the residents and fellows want to listen to it at double speed. I don't want to, personally, I wouldn't want to listen to Mickey Mouse give a lecture, but they feel like they can get through the lecture a lot faster. I've heard that. So there may be part of that. Okay, so that's going to be an interesting problem. Maybe we'll look into that at the SEA to see if there's anybody, and I encourage anybody that's watching this webcast to please, enter into an SEA discussion and let us know if you think you have some better options about how to solve this problem of where to host this content. And the problem is it's easy to host it and figure out a place to host it, but it's not easy how to figure out to make it widely publicly available. At least that's my impression.
Yeah, but not too public, because we don't want, some of the topics in pain medicine can be quite sensitive, and there's some very passionate patient groups. And so I'm a little bit worried that, they're gonna, I don't know that we could be somehow pirated or hijacked by a passionate patient group that doesn't agree with some of the lecturers or something like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't really a choice. It's almost black and white. It's either public and everybody can get to it. And for example, I was interested in the fact that you left your Google Drive open to editing so that people could go in and change a PowerPoint, for example, and as opposed to just read only. it's very, very difficult to try and find that gray line of where to put things. So it may be useful to host things like the lectures on the actual PowerPoints on something like the AAPBD, the Fellowship Pain Project, Program Directors. It's always a hard one for me to say. There's
I know.
Papa
Yeah.
for the pediatric people, and everybody has their acronym, but I'll just say the Fellowship Pain Directors Group, for them maybe to
Yeah.
host that type of content, and then you could put the webcasts in a YouTube channel. Do you think that the webcast would cause some irritation or blowback from some of these patient groups if they were able to find it?
They could, though I thought that you could have YouTube alert you to comments being posted, and you could either agree to have it posted or not agree to have it posted. So I think that that's what I would like to do, is to sort of filter the comments before being able to be posted.
Okay, so that would be a
Mhm.
moderated type of YouTube channel. And I'm sorry, I'm actually not. I know how to do a private YouTube channel, but I don't know if they what level of moderation that they allow on a public YouTube channel. That would be interesting. So yeah, hopefully somebody in our audience may have some familiarity with that, and will be able to get back to us on that.
That would be great, Glenn.
How about a little bit about the institutional support? How did I heard you say just your non-clinical time? Was there anything in terms of the institution did to try and help you support you in putting this project together?
Um, well, I mean, they obviously gave me the non-clinical time that I get for being assistant professor in the education track.
Did they
Um,
give you
they
extra
also
non-clinical time for this project, or
no,
no? Okay, so it
no,
was just out of that
no.
track. Okay,
Yes, yes. My department also sponsored me to do a teaching scholars class, which I don't
yep,
know if you have a similar thing in Oregon,
we
where,
do.
yeah, so it's like a 9 month program, or so I think that really helped inspire me to do something like this. So I was familiar with different pedagogical techniques, and so I think that was a big help. Otherwise, though, it was they actually are giving us the Zoom, so we use the UW Zoom feature. So, but other than that, it was just a pretty organic project.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about outcomes. So the first thing is, are you still, even when you've gone to the monthly meeting, are you still having around 40 to 50 participants in the monthly meeting now?
No, it significantly dropped as soon as clinics were open. So it's about half that now.
Okay,
Um, and you're usually around 15 to 20 at this point.
okay.
Mhm.
Um, has there been some discussion about trying to regionalize it? So could you get all of the, West Coast to Mountain Time Zone or something like that, and try to get agreement from all those program directors to hold a
Yeah.
joint session every, week, I mean, once a month at X time o'clock, or has that had any
I
gone
think
anywhere?
yeah, absolutely. I think we are going to have to add different time zones in order for different regions to be able to participate, especially if we add on some European programs. I think they could latch onto the East Coast time zone, but I guess one of the barriers to that is that the speaker then has to give an hour lecture and then be present for 2 or 3 hour long Q&A sessions. I think it's not as high stress because you're not having to give a lecture and you're just there to chat. So I think it could be fun for some people, but it does take a significant amount of time. So I'm hopeful that people will be generous with their time
So that's a
in that
question
regard.
mark. We don't know. We think
Mhm.
it's possible, though the faculty might really like it and love to do it, or maybe not to want to put 3, 4 hours into an entire project like that. So that would be
Right.
something
Yeah.
to follow up with. All
Yeah,
right. In
absolutely.
terms of the outcomes, you mentioned that the fellows really liked it. Did you do anything
Mhm.
formal? You're in that education scholars track. Did you do
Yes.
anything formal to actually evaluate any type of outcomes?
I did, Glenn. So I initially sent out a pilot survey to the fellows, and just to test the waters, and then that was probably about a couple weeks into it, and then after that I developed a more in-depth survey that I administered through REDCap with the help of one of my fellows from last year. And we have submitted a paper about it to Pain Medicine, which is a journal that often publishes about educational initiatives. So haven't heard back from them, but are hopeful that
would you mind being able to share? So it sounds like the very first survey you did you do a needs analysis before you started? Did you do anything like that?
No, this is, pretty quick. I just sort of threw this all together. I mean, I did sort of my own quick needs analysis. My fellows were sitting at home all day doing nothing. And so I just needed to do something really quick to get everybody engaged and to keep everybody learning. So
Yeah, it really did happen pretty fast. I mean, we went from working to not working in the space of 2 weeks or a week. So it was really kind of dramatic. Okay, and then so your initial survey, what feedback did you get from that initial survey, and how did you modify what you were doing based on the feedback?
So the initial survey, indicated that the fellows really appreciated sort of the fresh content. And so um, we kept, because we had thought, well, maybe we should structure this more and ask people to lecture on certain topics. But after that, we're like, well, if they like the sort of fresh ideas and doesn't feel too formal and they like that informal feeling, let's keep that. So we decided to just keep it a little bit informal. They needed obviously some help connecting and networking and talking. And so that's when we started to try to encourage faculty to use the breakout rooms and then try to make the lectures a little bit less old-fashioned. I'm going to talk for an hour and more interactive because this didactic is really supposed to be really focused on fellow needs. So it's a little bit different than having a guest speaker come when they're talking to the whole department and fellows are a part of it, but not the main part of it. And so really trying to keep it at the level of the fellows for the needs of the fellows. And so maybe injecting some questions or some interactive features into their lecture. That of course requires a little bit of coaching from me prior to their lecture to just try to get them comfortable, like figure out how to use the Zoom breakout rooms. So yeah, and people they try their best, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So that was something that we changed based on feedback from the initial quick survey.
In terms of engagement, having been a
Yeah.
participant in a couple of these type of situations, one of them sort of required the speaker and then a secondary person, the moderator, to sort of watch the chat, because the chat actually became a very interactive thing with lots of questions coming in through the chat instead of breakout rooms. This was another technique that was used by another group. And then somebody would be monitoring the chat and then would, I won't say interrupt the speaker, but would say, hey, we've got a question from our audience. This is a really good question, blah, 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 this, that. And then the speaker could engage in answering some of those questions because it was hard to lecture, but at the same time monitor the chat box. Some people are quite good at it, but most of us are not. And then also the chat box became a way for posting links to things. People would say, well, here's a journal article actually about this topic, and then post the link in there. So I found that the chat box was an interesting adjunct to the engagement that you seek. Did you find that to also be true in your?
Yeah, totally, Glenn. Yeah, the chat box has been really important. And that's pretty much what I try to do is I try to keep track of the chat box. It was a bit of a learning curve for me, just because sometimes if there was an awkward sort of pause in the discussion, I would, need to try to fill that pause with some thoughtful questions, which is something, I don't know, in Grand Round, something usually the chair of the department has the clever questions to ask at the end of the presentations, but so I had to sort of try to figure out how to do that.
So you mean when it went to this sort of discussion only type format?
Correct.
Theoretically, it already asked the lecture. If people came in and really weren't asking questions, you needed to have a list of questions that you could pop in there and say, well, I thought this was interesting, and maybe you'd care to comment on that. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Okay.
Yeah, or even even less specific than that, say something, hey, I see some of the Brigham Fellows here. Why don't you guys tell us how you do it at your institution? Or
Yeah,
I see University of Utah there. So to really try to promote that cross-institutional learning and get the fellows talking.
now, the only way to get their institution, at least when we were using WebEx, was when they logged in, that we had to ask them to post something in there in the chat about where they were from, because otherwise it might just say their name, or they might have put, some custom name in there.
Yeah.
I'm, you know,
Jed's iPhone.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, Jed's iPhone, right? So how did you identify people from being what institution they were from?
So I did ask people to do that, but I would say that only works for about a quarter of the people. I don't know why it is that people can't seem to do that. So sometimes I will change their names and put the institution in because I'll be the host. Or sometimes I'll just say, hey, Jed's iPhone, what institution are you from?
Okay. All right, so that was important for our listeners that you as the host in some of these platforms could actually go in and change the name of a participant in the chat box or in the participant list. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
Now, I did want to ask a little bit about the breakout rooms. I can see pros and cons to the breakout rooms. You mentioned
Yeah.
that your pro was to try to get the shy to maybe want to interact with the smaller group. But the
Mhm.
con would be you could have some really interesting things going on in one breakout room, and the rest of the group wouldn't benefit from it. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and would you continue to use it that way, or tell us your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so you had it exactly right, Glenn. The problem was that people would break off into small rooms. They would actually turn their cameras on. They would actually interact a little bit, but then the host or the lecturer would, try to pop into the different rooms. But, you know, sometimes they would spend half the time in one room and another room never got visited. And so, and then people were just missing out on all the discussion. And so I'm not really sure. Right now when the group is around 15, it's okay to just leave it as it is. But if the group becomes much larger with the addition of programs, then I think I will consider using that breakout room feature again.
Interesting, because my gut, being an old-fashioned kind of guy, kind of seems like, well, you can take a horse to water. So I guess I don't really mind if you don't want to be an active participant, as long as we have enough active participant and engagement to keep the discussion going, then that's okay. And then I might sacrifice that if I tried to go to the breakout rooms. But that's a really interesting thing. We'll have to hear people how they experiment with that. All right, well, I kind of want to go to the last point about that to continue on with our conversation about outcomes. What can you tell us about your final survey that you did? What types of questions did you ask, and what results are you able to share with us prior, hopefully, to a publication?
Yeah, so we sort of adopted questions from various more formal surveys about sort of networking, group interaction, and questions that had been more vetted than the ones that I just sort of made up in my first survey. And yeah, it
Can,
pretty much
can we address
confirmed.
that in a little more detail? And the reason I say
Yeah,
that is because a lot of the listeners on this program, I want to point out that sometimes it's difficult to publish education research. And that is because we don't undergo some of these formal steps. And one of them is the construct of surveys, how we put together surveys, and that it's a validated set of questions and scales that we're using. So maybe you can touch on that briefly to help our audience.
I can, but at this moment, it's been a year. I can't remember the name of I could look it up really quick if you wanted to pause.
But you
Um,
basically went to an external source to look
yes,
for questions to
just
ask about what
correct.
part, engagement, or
Yeah.
specifically what were you looking for?
Yeah, we were looking for questions or questionnaires that had been developed to assess engagement, to assess learning, and yeah, that those type of questions, because that's something that was really sort of the goals of the didactic. And so we sort of just adopted questions that were relevant off of those surveys. And I wish I could tell you. what the names, I could look it up, what the
I
names
think
of the
so.
surveys
If
were.
you can get to it fast, I'll ask you to just briefly
Okay,
take a moment to that, and then I'm going to speak to the
okay,
audience a little bit while you're doing that.
okay.
So again, it's important when you're trying to get a publication, particularly for education research, is that you have some rigor in the way that you are measuring your outcomes. And a very common outcome is sort of satisfaction surveys or something like that, or some sort of survey outcomes. And those are a fairly weak a weak type of outcome and are not well viewed by the more difficult journals to publish in. I'll just put it that way, in the higher impact journals. Your institution itself probably has a resource to help you construct validated surveys. So you should take a look. You may have a teaching and learning center, or you may have somebody that has experience with this. And I advise you, when you're putting one of these together, to run it by those type of people if you find one, if you're not using a prior validated instrument. So I'll give you an example. I was trying to publish a paper myself, and I wanted to use a survey to test how people liked an app that we were developing. And so I used a prior published tool that was common in the electronics industry for evaluating usability of different types of computer software. And so that supports me when I go try to publish it. Say, look, I used this instrument. I just didn't make up my questions, which is a common pothole that new people to research will fall into when constructing a survey, is just trying to start with their questions essentially that they just made up. All right, Rebecca, were you able to find it?
Yeah, I just found it. Um, so basically, the second, more formal survey was designed to assess three primary domains, and those were collaboration, education, and networking. And so we use the IDEA Partnership Success Rating Scale as sort of inspiration to develop the survey questions.
Excellent. If you want, you might want to post that in the chat. I don't know if the chat box is going to show up on the video recording, but I will
Okay.
open the chat box, and that'd be great if you could post that in there. Yeah, so that's a great example of using some sort of a well-established methodology or tool. And that even includes if you're going to do a pre and post knowledge test, believe it or not. It's not that simple to construct those tests in a psychometrically approved way, or validated way to create even something as simple as a knowledge test. Okay, what can you tell us about your results?
So the results, confirmed, that it was a popular program. We had about 25 participants at that point. It peaked at 46, but by the time we sent out the second survey, excuse me. So we had about 31 people complete the second survey, and 27 had been participating in the collaboration for longer than a month, and were either attendings or fellows. And I'm trying to look here. So basically, yeah, we talked about, we wanted to know about attendance and how often they went, and we asked questions about how often they thought the didactic should continue, as once a day was becoming a little overburdensome. And so we kind of stretched it out to once a week, and then we stretched it out to once a month, where it's been ever since. And we asked questions about the networking, and people did find that to be very useful. So yeah, the results were positive, and we didn't find any big surprises. So we're
Great.
just trying to,
I'll interject one item in there, and that is for those of
yeah,
you that are interested in doing something like this. The increased frequency also posts a burden on the organizer, because you may have gaps in the schedule. So like if you were trying to do something every day, you might have Thursday uncovered and you're scrambling around at the last minute trying to get a speaker to fill that spot. So frequency actually has a little bit to play in here. Okay, well, I guess
I think, oh, one thing I did want to say is that we actually tried to do a Jeopardy, which was a ton of work on the part of the fellows who did it. And we were relieved to find out that only 16% of the survey respondents thought that was a very helpful didactic type. So, and only about 30% liked the board review questions. And so I think the fellows really did appreciate having the lectures. They liked the journal clubs. We had a couple of faculty debates like about marijuana and chronic pain and opioids, and they really enjoyed those as well. So
Okay, so they like
yeah.
just the basic lecture, and they like the faculty debate, they like the journal club.
They did
That's
not
very
like the
good. I'm glad
tough
that you reported on that about whether they like the other things, because people are trying all kinds of the things. I know we tried a couple of online Jeopardy platforms, and we had a couple of fails because of technology not working during the thing, and then also it was a lot of work, and a lot of people just didn't think it was that great. So
Yeah,
so that's a good point.
exactly.
All
So
right.
relief.
Just before we close it up here, any last thoughts or recommendations that you'd make to your fellow educators that might be watching this podcast on, advice or anything for people trying to develop this type of program?
Um, well, I think that never hurts to ask. So just sending out random cold emails, don't be shy. And I think really promoting cross-institutional and cross-nation communication about your specialty is really valuable and something that previously we never offered our fellows. So,
That's
just do
fantastic.
it.
I think
Yeah.
I'll just put one interjection in there is that another technique that you can use for outcomes is you can actually do some sort of analysis of what's going on in the chat. Like, who are the people that are most engaged in the chat? Who is not engaged? What is a thematic analysis? Excuse me, of the type of information, what kinds of things are going on in the chat. So that's another option for those that you are trying to maybe trying to publish your work in this area. Well,
Yeah,
Rebecca,
great
that was
idea.
awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your project
Thank
with us.
you.
It looks like you've got some new things to do and some expansion and working with the fellowship directors. We wish you the best in that. And thank you so much for being on our I don't want to call it our show, but for participating in one of these webcasts. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Glenn. It was my pleasure.
Okay, that's Rebecca Dale from the University of Washington and the fellowship director. Please reach out to her if you've got anything. Thanks so much.
Thanks.